Mike Gilmour is an experienced leader, author and speaker with a passion for human connections. Throughout his 17 years across education and corporate sectors, he has demonstrated the ability to develop high-functioning teams and increased stakeholder satisfaction. Mike is currently the Deputy Head Teacher at GEMS World Academy, Singapore, and a massive believer in the power of education to positively shape a society. Mike is passionate about seeing people achieve their potential in life and work collaboratively to achieve shared success. He has a detailed understanding of human relationships and how aspects like communication, connection, and rapport contribute to both personal and corporate success. So Mike, welcome to the show, and tell us about your inspiration for your book, The Power of Rapport.
Well, thanks very much, guys. It's really good to be with you. Heard a bit about this podcast, so good to have the opportunity just to, excuse me, just to join you. So yes, I did write The Power of Rapport, and I need to qualify that first of all by saying that I have a new respect for authors out there, because this was a journey for me and a bit of a passion project, and something I learned so much through as I went through the journey. But you know, as I say in my book in the first few chapters, I've always had this passion for human connections and really watching how people have interacted and how that then influences them, the people around them, and in their community and society. So yeah, it was a journey for sure to write the book, and something that really just grew out of a passion that I've always had. So great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to just chatting a bit more about the book and some of my experiences in education and leadership, and hopefully it can be an encouragement to some people out there.
Yeah, love the fact it was a passion project, Mike. Love that. Mine was skateboarding. I tried to learn to skateboard over the Christmas break. Bit different from writing a book. Tell us a bit more about Rapport. What is it? What's it all about?
Well, you know, as human beings, I really believe we're wired for connection, right? And many people, Brené Brown, you know, and so many people in the past have always spoken about that, you know, that as human beings, we are always more effective in what we're doing when we're together with people, when we're connected. And I think as educators in particular, we know that, you know, that's not news to us. When we're in the classroom, we know when we've got a connection with our students or with our colleagues, things work better. The student experience is better, the working experience is better. So it really boils down to connections and how we connect with one another. And I suppose, you know, as I've just been a lifelong learner in this area of rapport and relationships, and by no means am an expert, I've sort of realized more and more that the world defines people into either relational or non-relational. So you often hear it said, oh, that person's just relational, you know, that they connect really easily with other people. And for other people, they're not really, or they're not deemed as relational as others. But I choose to challenge that status or that perspective, because I believe rapport or building connections is actually a skill that you have. And it's a skill just like any other skill that you can develop and acquire. And so that was really the foundation of my book, was how can you be intentional about going about building connections with people and building rapport? Because it's an intentional act rather than something that just happens by default. Now, sure, some people, it'll happen easily. Other people have to work on it a bit more. But if we boil it down, it's really to that emotional connection that we have with another human being, you know, and I think we've all experienced that, right? Where we've just got a good connection. You can almost just tell what the other person's going to do or how they're feeling. And so I say in the book as well, it's more than just being friendly. You know, being friendly is great. You know, we have to be friendly and nice to each other. I think that's at a surface level important for rapport. But really it goes a lot deeper than that. It's an emotional connection.
Yeah, I've got that, Mike, there. You quoted that rapport is a deep emotional connection and understanding between two people. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, is it just a tool to get what you want as a leader, Mike? Sorry to challenge it, but I'm intrigued by it.
I think it can be, absolutely, right? And you know, one of the chapters later on in the book, when I speak about strategies to build rapport, is authenticity. Because let's be honest, there's nothing worse than someone who's faking trying to be nice to you, and you just know they're just being nice because they want to get their way, or they want you to do something, right? They're trying to buddy you up. So you know, can you cause someone to perform better, to work more effectively in a team, and ultimately achieve more through building rapport with them? Absolutely. But really the authenticity is the key bit. Why are you building rapport? Do you actually genuinely care for that person? And that's why you're building the deep connection with them? Or is it because your motive is slightly off and you're doing it for selfish gain? So look, I think it's, if you look at leaders throughout history, I think the effective leaders have been the leaders who've been able to manipulate people into doing what they want them to do. So no doubt it is a tool. As a school leader, I know that our school culture is nowhere near perfect or effective if we aren't building connections with each other. And so, yeah, as a school leader, I want our students to have an amazing experience. I want our school culture to be great. I want everyone to succeed. And to do that, I want to build a culture of connection and a culture of rapport. So I suppose it's, yes, it does get me what I want, but it's for the greater good of everyone.
You've already recognized, Mike, that there are some people that just appear friendly, that are relational, that are a social, whether it's a social butterfly or just a social guru of getting to know people and people's developing people's trust. How do you begin to develop that rapport without that rapport being developed in a way that seems contrived and seems a little bit too deliberate? That'll get people's barriers up, won't it? What are the tips and tricks in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the minute it's not authentic and people can sense or see that you are trying to do something because, like we said before, you want them to get something or for any other means, it's actually repulsive. So what I always feel, the starting blocks is to just build simple connections, right? And it's really more about what you are doing than what the other person is doing. You see, when we're intentional about building rapport, we're more observant, right? So we're aware about even how our body is operating. So what is my body language communicating to people? Because that's key, right? In building a connection. The conversations that I have every day with people, let's think about the manner I'm doing it. Am I doing it in a manner or a way that's going to establish a connection? Or am I just simply dictating a task that is required to be done? So I believe every single interaction is a chance to either, build someone up and fill up that sort of sieve that I speak about in the book, or it's an opportunity to just sort of break it down and it's a missed opportunity. So are we intentional about all our interactions every single day, seeing them more than just delivering content or a conversation, but actually as an opportunity to build a connection with someone? And so taking a greater interest in people is important, identifying, what's happening in their lives, and then really showing genuine interest in that you're interested in them as a person, as opposed to just them as a title or as an employee. So it's small actions, I really feel, small, deliberate and intentional actions every single day or every week, every few days, that's just going to help create that culture and build those emotional connections.
That knowing the people that you work with and knowing the people that you're interacting with day in, day out, and I really understand what you're feeling there about that thought of, well, is this superficial and surface level, or is this actually somebody who really cares? What are the key things that leaders and that colleagues can do to show that? We know actions speak louder than words. So what are the things that leaders and colleagues can do to really show that this isn't a contrived message, this is authentic and this is people caring? What are the key factors in that?
So I would say the most important factor is consistency, because if you've established a relationship with someone and worked with them for a period of time, they'll very quickly be able to identify if your relationship and connection with them is authentic or not. If someone is truly intentional about building rapport, that's going to be consistent as they go along. If someone is just looking for a quick fix or a quick job to be done, there might be the quick sweet talk, little dangle the carrot to get you to do something. But then it won't be consistently demonstrated through how they're interacting and operating. So think about it. If they are, if you think about all the different factors that go into building rapport, right? From your simple conversations to more intentional acts about getting people to work together, and build together to how you carry yourself in terms of your spoken, verbal and non-verbal communication. All of those things, really build the picture about how people trust you or not. I speak a little bit in the book about trust, and we all know that the key to trust is relationships and having a connection with people. But one of the theories we speak about in the book is reducing the lack of trust or the uncertainty. It's called uncertainty reduction theory. Now, it's quite a disputed theory, but really, in essence, the theory speaks about every time you meet someone, your brain is working hard to reduce your uncertainty level in this other person and really figure out if they are trustworthy or not. And if we approach life that way, so every person we meet, if we have the knowledge that that person in their subconscious, they are very quickly figuring out through your appearance, through how you communicate, through how you operate, if you can be trusted or not, then surely if we know that, well, we can then change the way that we interact so that we can reduce that uncertainty even faster for them and begin to build a connection. So it's about breaking down those walls. But I think being authentic is absolutely key. And I think also sometimes we try too hard, and that also comes off a little bit repulsive for people when we're too happy, and we're in the middle of a pandemic here, right? And then all of a sudden, hey, the world's going wonderful and everything's great, and people look at you going, geez, this guy's not even on this planet, man. What's wrong with this guy? So it has to be authentic. And like I said, the connection is not about simply always being happy, because if you are happy every single day of your life, you're not a human being. Yes, we can choose, hey, I'm not having a great day today. Yeah, but I'm going to choose to be positive and move on. And that's good. But being able to be vulnerable and show people, hey, yeah, today's not going well. But use that as a tool to still be honest with people and build a connection. It's a real vital tool. So sorry, there was a lot in that answer.
That's great. It's great listening, Mike. I just want to come back to that theory you're talking about. So when your mum and dad and your grandpas and also talk about first impressions last, they're right, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, like I said, this theory has been disputed quite a bit. But if we simplify it and break it down, it's simple human nature. No matter who you meet, you are figuring things out. Subconsciously, your brain's working exceptionally hard to put them in a box, right? And to say, okay, this is someone I'm going to trust. This is someone I'm going to work with. This is someone I'm avoiding. How do I get out of this conversation as soon as possible? But knowing that is so important, because then that, like I said, changes the way we approach new, conversations or new interactions with people. So so it's really important. I say several times in the book that awareness leads to regulation, and that's a statement that I really believe in, because unless we have an awareness of, first of all, our own actions and how we interact with people, we can't modify them and regulate them in order to use them to build a connection or rapport with others. So take your body language, for example. Now, they say, statistics, right, about 60% of your daily communication is nonverbal. So coming through your body, right, through your movements, your facial expressions, how you carry yourself. So if that's the case, if 60% of your communication on a daily basis is nonverbal, why do we not dedicate time to, really understanding our bodies and seeing how we can use our bodies to communicate the message we want? We spend a lot of time working on our verbal communication, and that's important. But it's important as well. If you're walking down the corridor and you're carrying yourself in a manner that's stressed out, hunched shoulders, face looking down, that's telling people you're not having a great day, and they in their minds are going to form an impression. Now, I'm not saying you got to fake it, all right, but it's just an awareness that, okay, well, how am I going to carry myself when I walk? How am I going to stand when I'm talking to somebody? Am I going to stand in a position that's open, or am I going to be all folded up and pretty angry look on my face? Those things are so important, and they are small, simple actions. like I said, you don't want to fake it. So it has to be authentic, but it's more just about having an awareness and then being able to make those small little changes as and when you can.
As we make new,
sorry, Lewis.
God, as we make new relationships, Mike, is there a default setting for how you should approach those relationships? So you talked a lot about, first impressions count. Within those first few seconds, few minutes, you're deciding whether this is going to be a friend, a colleague, somebody to get away from. Is it within us to have a default setting for that? Should we go into that initial conversation and, just as human beings, trying to be kind? Should we go into that conversation being very open and just assuming trust? Should we go into that conversation with positive intentions? What's the default? Is there one? And what would that default position be?
That's a great question. And I would say no, there isn't a default in terms of, like a formula is to what you're going to follow. In terms of your humanistic approach, in terms of being kind, listening more than you're going to speak, things like that, I think absolutely those are across the board. But I wouldn't say that there's a formula that you would use, with everyone you meet. Your interactions in your work setting are going to be very different to someone you meet around the barbecue, at a friend's house. So I think it's just being aware of the situation, but just being open as well. So when we have that awareness, as we let's say we're in that situation, we've met a new colleague, right? Our awareness and our approach, even in our thinking, is, okay, well, I'm going to get to meet this person, but I'm going to build a connection with them. So even in your thinking, it's not just, hey, here's our new colleague, he's flown in from wherever. You're beginning to be intentional. So, hey, tell me a little bit more about yourself. Okay. And then looking to identify connections. That's really the foundation, the building block of rapport, is those simple connections. So that's why you would see, if you had to walk into a staff room, let's use a school, an international school, for example, right? The people who are from the same country will migrate to each other more often than not, right? Now, that's not because they just wanting to do that. It's because they've got, at a very foundational level, a connection with other people that leads them to feel safe. Now, they might be completely different people, but their connection is they're South African or they're from the US or wherever. So knowing that, and then seeking out those sort of immediate connections is important. And I think that's a very quick way that you can build a connection with someone upon which you can build. Because if you think about someone who's, let's say, I'll take it from South Africa, where I'm from, Cape Town. So if I meet someone for the first time who's from Cape Town as well, immediately for me, there's an emotional connection to where I grew up. Same thing for that person, right? So immediately on an emotional level, we've got a connection, all right? And we'll, might even talk about the same places. He might have gone, or she might have gone to similar school to where I went to, or university. So there's an emotional connection there that goes deeper than the surface level conversation. And then we can build a relationship upon that, and then the rapport grows from that. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to build rapport when there's simply no connection, when someone is completely removed from you. And I think you can just see that it's human nature. So yeah, so that's how I would approach it.
So finding common grounds high up on that list.
Yeah, it's at the top, really. Because you can't go any deeper, on a first encounter. So from your side, what you're going to be doing is seeking out those commonalities, but then you're also going to be doing is being aware of how you are portraying yourself. How are you coming across? Are you coming across as someone who is open to build connections in the way you communicate, both verbally and non-verbally? Are those things coming out, or are you pretty closed up, really just, you're more interested in the barbecue than the person standing around it?
I'm just going to take this back a little bit, Mike. I'm interested in, there's all sorts of exit points here, but basically we're wired up to have a fight or flight, aren't we? Just evolutionary. So when we have them first encounters, we either want to get in there and we're interested because they might help us in our instincts, or you might want to get away because they might be a threat.
Yeah.
You then talk about regulation. So how important is emotional intelligence in this whole process?
It's huge. And I speak about it in the book. it's understanding or being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes really is the foundation of emotional intelligence, and being able to perceive their emotional state and then react to that. That's absolutely critical, because that is also when we establish the deep connection with people. It's when they're going through the crisis in their life. And you can, through not a massive action, but often just a simple word of encouragement or something small, that is when you can build that connection that's long lasting. So being able to just perceive somebody else's emotional state through how they're appearing, through how they're speaking is absolutely critical. And there's a few exercises and things that I speak about in the book to just help you understand how your emotions affect your body, right? Because if we can't understand it, how are we going to expect someone else to? So simple things like thinking about either a traumatic or a great time in your life that's deep rooted or deep seated in you, and then thinking and just reflecting upon what that feels like physically in your body, because there's always a physical manifestation to an emotional response or state. So what does that feel like? And then really just getting comfortable with your own emotions is so critical, because if you can't be comfortable with your own emotions and sort of know right now, okay, what emotional state am I in? How are you going to perceive somebody else's emotional state, right? And then respond to them. So look, I'm by no means an expert. Guys like Daniel Goleman and that are real experts in this field. But I'm learning and I'm growing that's such a key part of building relationships and rapport. It's a key part of leading. It's a key part of being successful in life. Just having that EQ to be able to perceive where other people are and then respond appropriately to that.
Sorry, I was laughing halfway through that, because I'm going to come back to EQ in a minute, but it reminds me and resonates with us, and everyone's experienced those awkward, horrible first dates that you have. Where you're clambering to try and find something to talk about, or some kind of connection.
There's no connection.
And it's not there, and you're thinking, I just need to get out of here. And Alan talking about fight or flight just brings that home.
Yeah.
On the EQ side of things, how important, I'm doing a course around executive coaching at the minute, which I'm really enjoying. And one of the real key parts of that, which personally I find it quite challenging, other than the listening, which I always find challenging, is this idea of not becoming emotionally attached, not listening and empathizing enough to pull yourself into the issue and become part of the issue, but actually to be with and alongside somebody and support them without that emotional attachment. As a person that values empathy, how do you empathize without being pulled in emotionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's my approach, right? In life, in the corporate world, even in school, sometimes we are told to remove emotions, right? Don't let your emotions get in the way. They'll cloud your judgment, right? Don't do that. You're too emotional. You're not going to make a right decision. But I actually think our emotions are absolutely critical to us making effective decisions, because we're going to perceive things through our emotions and through our intuition way more than what we're going to cognitively, see or feel or understand. So understanding that's absolutely critical, that we should not separate our emotions. What we need is the skills to be able to regulate our emotions, right? So that we as human beings have the power, which we do, to be able to control our own emotional state. So think about it. I'm sure you've experienced it. You could meet someone and something terrible has gone wrong, and their emotions are just all over the show, but like a roller coaster, right? All over the show, completely unregulated emotions. And you kind of don't know what you're going to get with them. One day you could get someone who's okay. The next day it's all over the show, because that person hasn't got the ability, and it's not easy, don't get me wrong, I'm no expert on this, but they haven't been able to regulate their emotional state. So I feel what the approach should be is to actually understand what emotional state you are in very, very deeply, right? So right now, I need to take some simple ones. Okay, right, I'm feeling sad, right? Something's happened in my life, I'm feeling sad. Right. Now, is that going to affect the way that I carry myself for the rest of the day? Is that going to affect all of my interactions, all of my, work that I go about on a daily basis? Or am I able to understand that, acknowledge it, absolutely, and then be able to regulate my actions around that so that I can still carry on with a productive day? I can still build connections, by no means denying the emotion that I'm feeling, but yet I've got control over it. And I'm not being dictated to by my emotions. I'm in control of my emotions. So I think that's more powerful. And that's something definitely I've been working on, rather than trying to separate your emotions. Because as a human being, I don't think I've seen someone who's been successful in separating the emotions from a successful decision or a period of life, or dealing with whatever it might be, on a consistent basis. I think if you look at a doctor or a surgeon in the ER room, okay, there's an element where they have to remove themselves from the situation. Is that consistent? Is that sustainable long term? I disagree. I think you can't be. So it's almost actually harnessing the power of your emotions, as opposed to trying to separate them and keep them to one side.
So the trick is almost being aware that the emotions will come, and having an appropriate response, and being ready for that.
Yeah. And knowing that your emotions are powerful, right? And emotions aren't bad. So if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling joyful, whatever it might be, those are great emotions. And every minute of the day, you're experiencing an emotion. But just having the understanding of what emotion you're experiencing, what that feels like in your body, and then, right, I know what it is, right? How am I going to respond, and what's my day going to look like? So that if something does, go wrong, and I'm not in a good space emotionally, the day's not a write-off, right? Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we diminish the emotion at all, because that's important. If things go wrong in life, and you're sad, you're down, you're depressed, you have anxiety, that's absolutely legitimate. But it's just about acknowledging that, and then responding or regulating, your behavior in a manner that your emotions don't dictate how you behave, but really you have the power and authority over your emotions.
We could start to lean this towards where rapport has broken down, or where rapport, for some reason or another, whether it's the subject of a conversation or a relationship, has started to turn sour. How does that happen in terms of rapport? And what are the steps that you might want to take to start to bring that relationship round? How do you start to repair those relationships, I think, is my question.
Yeah, it's another great question. So here's what I think, right? And I speak about in the book. Rapport is like a sieve, all right? Or colander, right? So imagine that. And every day you're pouring sand into it, and it's just leaking out. Every single day it's just leaking out. It's quite slowly, but it's leaking out. And when it hits rock bottom and it's completely empty, to try and fill it up again, man, you need a bucket of sand, right? To try and fill it up. You need an intervention. You need something huge to try and do something. But if you're just filling up that sieve colander every single day with a conversation here, a touch point there, a little bit of an encouragement, that's going to maintain that full level within that sieve. And then you really have got rapport with someone, if we can picture it that way. So as a leader, right, and as I'm sure you guys as well, at times you have to make tough decisions, and people don't always like those decisions, and that goes with the territory. But if you have a connection and rapport established with someone, those sort of daily operational challenges that you might face, they're safeguarded by the rapport that you have with that person. And often people will see beyond the circumstance because they know you, they've got a connection with you, and they know you've got their best interest at heart. But if there's no rapport, if that thing's completely empty, and then you have to have the tough conversation with someone, that's where you see it completely break down, because there's no emotional connection, so there's no trust in what you're doing, and that's often what leads to things breaking down, often irreparably. So the goal as a leader, or anyone who really wants to be successful in this field, is to make sure that you are having touch points with all of the people in your immediate community regularly, just to keep that connection burning. And then when things do go wrong, more often than not, they can be smoothed over because you've got a connection with them. Now, you speak about what you can do. I would say if things have broken down fundamentally, I think you go back to square one. And you simply start establishing a connection again, being intentional, identifying commonalities, and then just working slowly to build that trust back. But it's way easier to just have regular touch points every single day than allow that relationship to degenerate completely till there's no momentum in it, and you have to rebuild that momentum. So it's like a flywheel, you can imagine. Those relationships, they have momentum, and once that momentum's going, that flywheel's spinning. Right? Even if it had to slow down slightly, it's still going to spin. But if it stops and you have to regenerate that momentum again, that takes a lot of intervention and a lot of work.
It's a very interesting one, Mike. I want to flip it the other way here. And some leaders might prefer to have tough conversations with people they don't know. And they would find it harder to have those tougher conversations with people they've got a rapport with, because there's that personal connection. They don't want the emotion involved. How do you think that would play out? So someone who is having to do a tough conversation with someone they know really well.
It's always easier to do with someone you don't know, right? because you haven't got that connection with them, right? But I think if you're working in a school setting, you're going to know everyone, and you should have a connection with everyone, and it will vary, right? You're not going to have a amazing connection with all your staff members, but a fundamental connection is important. I think it comes down to the leader actually, and just knowing that that's your job, that you have to have the tough conversations. However, the manner in which you have them is the key to success. And even through a tough conversation, you can actually build rapport through doing it in the right way. But look, tough conversations are called tough conversations for a reason, right? Because they're not easy, they're tough. And yeah, I would argue that it probably is harder from your perspective to have the conversation with the person who you have rapport with. For the person receiving the message, it's easier for them if they have a connection with you, because they would understand you, and they would understand why this is happening. And there would be if anything, a slightly softer landing. If you met someone out of the blue and you have a tough conversation with them, they don't know who you are, they don't trust you, and now you're hammering them with something, that could be detrimental for their perspective. So I think the spotlight's on the leader who's having that tough conversation to realize it's part of the job, and really to rise beyond that.
Give us some examples, Mike, of some of those check-ins you talk about. I like that colander analogy, and I sort of thought one there of you're almost spinning plates. You're going around to just keep something spinning and keep the rapport going with one person before you run back to the start of the line and you go again.
Yeah.
What are some things, what are some practical tips that people can do to really see that and to have a go at applying that in real life?
So before I share what I do, I just want to re-emphasize the importance of authenticity. So it's not a case of, a checkbox, I've got to go and see so-and-so and check him off, because that's not authentic. It really has to come from a place of genuine care and genuine desire. But then we can be intentional about it. So what I do is I like to connect, even if it's a simple conversation, with all of our faculty members, students, obviously where possible, every day, every few days, right? Now that's, the faculty of, I think it's 86 or 90 people, students, 550 students in our primary school, you can't do that, right? But practical things, what I would do is just putting yourself physically in a place where you can interact with people. So basically get out your office, and into, whether it's before school, after school, walking down the hallways, dropping in to say hi. Someone you haven't connected with in a while, I would walk to their classroom, drop in to say, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? You were off sick the last couple of days. How are you feeling? Small things like that are real practical strategies. What I also used to do is think quite strategically, right? Who have I not just touched base with in a long time? And I wouldn't make a list or anything, but I just think about it. I'm like, you know what, that person, I haven't really just connected with them in a while. Let me just pop over and just say hi, see how they're doing. And it's that small little touch point. Another practical strategy is also how you communicate. Via email, there are a million emails flying around, especially in a school context, internally and externally. but a simple response and an acknowledgement that, oh, hey, that was a well-crafted email. Thanks for writing that to that parent who I was BCC'd on. So those small, simple actions showing people you care and you actually take an interest in what they have done authentically, those are small little strategies that I often use. But ultimately, you just want to put yourself in a position where you can be around people. You know, we when at our school, when we started, look, amazing school, don't get me wrong, huge campus, world-class campus. Start of the school, we had, you know, all these amazing educators come in, new leaders, new curriculum, and then they said, okay, off you go, run a good school. You know, so it was like a bunch of individuals there, and over time we had to pull those pieces of that puzzle together. But what we realized as well is people just had to connect with each other, and this was the lesson for me, where I just saw it demonstrated that human beings were wired for connection. And as leaders, we didn't have to come up with these extravagant team building activities and things to do to get our staff to connect. We simply had to create a space and environment for them to be humans, just to get to know each other. And so we did some practical things by overhauling our meeting structure, creating space and time for people just to be with each other. And it's amazing how actually simplifying things leads to people connecting with one another. And that really built our culture to what it is today. So yeah, so being intentional is absolutely key. Creating the opportunity and the space and the environment for people to connect is critical. But then also some practical things, just thinking about, you know, right, who have I not connected with? And it's not a long conversation, it's just a touch point. Hey, how's it going? What can I help you with today? Encouraging them on an email, buying someone a coffee. If you see someone who's being a little down, you know, it's pretty, you know, easy to spot that if you're looking for it, right? You might not be appropriate to go and speak to them straight away, but maybe later on you can say, hey, I saw you a little bit down today. Is there anything I can help with? And just showing that you're there for people, that's so important.
I think what you're describing, Mike, is almost like a very good salesperson. And I know you talk about that in your book, that everybody's selling something.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more for us, please?
So I think salespeople, absolutely, especially good salespeople, understand emotional connection, because someone will always buy the house, the car, whatever it might be, when there's an emotional connection. Now, I would argue that your traditional salesperson is manipulating that for their financial gain, which I suppose is a salesman, right? So they're doing their job. What you're doing by building rapport is really for everyone's ultimate gain. You want that person to thrive. You want your organization to thrive. So look, absolutely. But what I speak about in the book is that you're right. We are all selling something at the end of the day, right? If you're a teacher in the classroom, you are selling your maths lesson to your students who are in front of you, right? If you're a school leader, or if you're an educator and you're going for an interview at another school, you are selling yourself to that school. So it's actually important to think of those situations like that. And then if you had to simplify it and break it down, okay, well, if you wanted to sell yourself, let's use the interview example, right? It's the end of the academic year. I'm sure some people are going through that. What would you want the other person interviewing you to know about you? And what are those things that you want them to say, you know what, we need that person because ABC, whatever it might be. So understanding that, and then once again, regulating your behavior and how you carry yourself to be able to portray those good things, those qualities, those skills that you have is so important. I feel, just taking it back a notch, you know, many people go through life sort of by default, right? So we're going through our work situations with absolutely complete unawareness of how we connect with other people, how other people perceive us, how we build connections with people. It's just sort of, we just go by default. We're just sort of going. But when we have that awareness that actually we can control these things, we can control how people perceive us, we can control and regulate our actions towards others so that our interactions are positive and we establish a connection, I think people thrive and succeed. And that's across all sectors of society, not just education.
Yeah, I fully agree with the perception. And Can we just take it into recruitment? Because you're talking there about the person trying to get a job. What about us guys that are trying to recruit high quality staff? How could we mold that process to make it more about the person rather than the pedagogy? Because we presume that teachers can teach. You've got a qualification. Everybody's got a qualification. How could we really get to know the person? Because really, it's the person we're employing, not the teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's how you structure it, right? So, and how you filter your recruitment. So generally, if we filter our recruitment effectively, the people who are shortlisted for positions should all be well qualified and should all have however many years of experience we're looking for, right? So, and if they've got good references, we know they can teach. So that's not that's not debatable. They can teach. They got good references. They qualify. They're experienced, right? And if we have to, we can still teach them more. Curriculum can be learned. So how I approach an interview is I'm looking 100% for how that person is going to fit into our team and the connection that they're going to have. Because if they can't build a connection with people, their students, their colleagues, but yet they're amazing, with curriculum, I still don't want them, to be quite honest, because they're not going to be a fit. So I think we have to structure it that way. Now, when I approach interviews, like I said, I'm just looking for those emotional connections. So sure, I'm going to ask questions about curriculum. I'm going to ask about teaching and learning and assessment and differentiation. But I'm also going to just, while that person is answering those questions, I'm going to be listening to the way they speak about their colleagues, the way they speak about their previous school. And just, this is where the emotions come in, right? And I'm trusting my gut and my intuition to tell me, this person is either a team player or they're not. This person's either going to fit in or they're not. And when we have that approach and remove, not completely, but we sort of take our cognitive processes away and we just try and feel the person out, right? And how they're going to connect with our community, I find more often than not, you make a great hire as opposed to a challenging hire. Now, it's not foolproof, don't get me wrong, but I think we must never purely just employ people because of their competency. We have to employ them because of their team nature and their ability to connect with others. In international schools, it's pretty tough because most of the interviews are done like this, unless they're at a job fair or they're in country. So it is challenging for sure. But it's just sort of taking time to really listen and feel the person out and just say, okay, well, what am I feeling about this person? What does my gut say?
Any really good questions there, Mike, that could really get into that? Like, there's always a standard stock set of questions that your school or your organization have. How could we go a little bit deeper? What would really get in to find out what they're about as a human?
Yeah. Each interview is different, and I try not use too many stock questions, although you'll often start off with those. But I like to approach questions in an interview, fairly broad at the top. But then as the person's answering and giving examples, that's when I drill down, and then you really get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening. I ask people, point blank, how do you build a connection with your students? And because if you can't build a connection with your students, or if you give me, answers that really I can sense you're not really intentional about it, but you sort of just do one or two activities, that tells me you haven't quite got an awareness yet that your connection with your students is critical. So I think just asking people point blank those questions: how do you build a connection with your students? What does team planning look like for you? That's often a good question that I ask. And people who are by nature looking to connect with others will often, when it comes to team planning, especially educators, will speak a lot about how they plan collaboratively and how they work together. Some other people will give a fairly standard response in terms of how many days a week they do it, and it might come across as a little bit of a chore rather than something they want to do. Now, don't get me wrong, I know planning meetings, right? But it tells you a bit more about their approach. So I think being quite direct is good. I like to also put people under a bit of pressure in interviews by asking some very direct questions, depending on how the interview is going, and really just seeing how they cope with that. not to try and be mean, but to see how they're going to respond. Do they respond in a manner that is still open to learn, to grow, and to, put your hand up if they haven't got the answer, or do they just keep getting the standard responses every time?
I like that idea of just putting your hand up and saying, listen, I'm not quite sure about that, but I'm willing to learn. And it comes back to what you were mentioning earlier about self-awareness. And as you were talking there about recruitment, I'm considering the teacher that personally I was, and that I've seen in interviews many a time, that might have had 2 or 3 years experience and has some really wonderful ideas, but really hasn't maybe got that self-awareness yet of understanding exactly who they are and what they're trying to do going forward. What are you looking for? I think you've touched upon it there with a little bit of humility, but what are you looking for in those people where you're like, you know what, you've got a lot of potential and I can work with that, and I feel like I can really add some value, as opposed to, you're not where you are and you're not particularly self-aware, and actually I'm going to leave that one. Where do you draw that line? What are the differences that you're looking for there?
Yeah. So I think, just to touch on your earlier point, the humility factor is so important. And I don't think there's anything wrong in an interview to, putting your hand up or just saying, you know what, I don't actually know that, or, I'm not too confident to share that. I would rather actually have someone who does that to someone who just makes it up on the spot, and we can all tell that they're making it up on the spot. So I think honesty and authenticity is so critical, because ultimately you're employing, as you said, Alan, you're employing the person, right? And you want that person to operate with integrity and authenticity and have a genuine care for all stakeholders in the community. You're not employing them as a math teacher or as a PE teacher, and sort of flipping it and seeing it in different ways is really important. But look, to your point about the sort of fairly new teacher who's coming in, and maybe hasn't, had that awareness, those years of experience, that, there's so much more to working in a school community than simply the delivery of curriculum. For me, it's the manner in which they articulate themselves. Even if you haven't come to a full awareness of who you are, how you operate, and an awareness of this, growing need to build connections, there's still a manner in how you communicate and how you carry yourself, which will tell people that you've got the potential, or you're open to building connections with others. So I look at that, and how they're talking. Now, it's hard on Zoom, because often this is communicated non-verbally, how someone's sitting, how they respond to a question. When you speak about a certain thing, it's quite an interesting little activity that you could always do. And I actually did this with a grade 11 class a few weeks ago now, when they asked me to come up. But I asked them, I did a little body language activity with them. So I sent 2 kids out the classroom, and I brought one child in, and I said to him, it was a small class, I said, okay, what I want you to do now, I want you just to tell us, just be honest, it's a safe space. Tell us about a terrible time in your life, just a time that was really hard for you. And he started speaking, and obviously told the class about this. And then I had him sit down, and then I brought in the other girl, and I said, right, tell me about a really exciting, happy, awesome time in your life. And, and she did. Now, prior to them leaving the classroom, I'd asked everyone else in the class to observe their body language, and how when they were simply communicating about a tragic event in their life or a really happy time, how it influences their body. And it was chalk and cheese. And that was just a simple activity, right? And that just shows, once again, how your emotional state is expressed physically. So someone sitting in an interview who is maybe answering questions, or they're very closed physically and their answers are very short, and the manner in which they're communicating is not conducive to really building connections, I would avoid. But many of the younger teachers who I've met, they're amazing, and they come in to learn, to grow. They want to connect with people. It's if you think about millennials as a generation, they seek out connection, right? They that's why they just want to be around people. So they naturally are seeking out community, but also sometimes extremely individualistic. So knowing that's important. But I would say that's a long answer, but I would say just the manner in which they answer those questions will tell you a lot more about them and who they could develop into.
Yeah, like you were saying earlier, it's developing that feel for the person.
Yeah.
And using that intuition and not trying to overanalyze it too much, but just asking those questions of, do they fit in? Are they a good person?
Yeah, definitely.
It's so hard to get it right, though, isn't it, Mike? It really is. And you talk about in your book about if it goes wrong, you're going to end up with either a toxic culture in your school, and that's not something that you want, or in any organization. So can we just explore that positive and toxic culture and what they look like, and then maybe as a follow-up we can look at some strategies for improving culture in any organizations?
Yeah. So organizational culture or school culture is something I'm really passionate about and something I'm learning about. I'm also by no means an expert on it. But what's important to realize is every single school has a culture already, right? So for the listeners out there, your school's got a culture. And I believe that culture can be defined by the daily interactions of all stakeholders. So if you are walking through the corridors or you're walking in the playground and you're seeing people naturally connect with each other positively, if you're seeing people laughing, engaging, doing things outside of school together, that's evidence that there is a good connection taking place and your school culture is positive. Now, we know that a positive school culture is critical for student success. No one can show me a school in the world that has high student academic standards and an absolutely toxic culture. So people aren't even connecting with each other. There's just no one wants to be there. It just simply doesn't happen. So creating the school culture should be the leader's absolute priority. Number one goal is to create the culture. Like I said earlier, the curriculum people can learn. All that stuff can come later, but if the culture's wrong, we're all dead in the water. So when I ever walk into a new school or a different school, I always look at how people are interacting. I kind of do it always. That's sort of my little passion in life, I think. But in a school particularly, so I would walk in and I'd just observe, okay, how do people connect? How does the head of school, the leader, interact with the staff, with the parent community, with the students? Because those things all paint a picture for what your school culture is. Now, it's absolutely important to have a positive school culture or to be building towards this positive school culture. Like I said, when I started our current school, it's a vastly different school to what it is now, where there's an exceptional staff culture and really people are absolutely committed. But when we started, just because of what it was such a new school, everyone was dumped together and we had to figure this thing out and try and work it out. What happened was people would work within their own silos. And there was a fear culture. People wouldn't really trust each other because as a school, we hadn't been intentional about building connections with each other. We've been so focused on getting the school up and running, getting the curriculum working, getting everything happening. We actually had missed out the most important piece. And so what happened was there was a lot of infighting. People wouldn't trust each other. People wouldn't even talk to each other. They would email each other and just completely avoid any physical interaction. And that, for me, defined a toxic school culture, and it has to be radically addressed. And so, as I mentioned earlier, what we did was just be intentional about creating opportunities for people to connect with each other. Now, there were some people who weren't a fit for the school, and they had to be moved on over several years. And we had to recruit really good people who were committed and wanting to grow and build our school community. So it wasn't an overnight thing. I think it was about 4 or 5 years it took for us to really get into a position where we felt, okay, we are really strong. So it's critical. If we go back to awareness, that's where it starts. So we have to be aware of what our school culture is like right now. And to quickly define that, we just take a look at the interactions of all the staff members.
There's a lot of takeaways there. Love that fact that you can go and observe and just watch the interactions. It's not necessarily about structures and procedures. It's purely humanistic factors that define the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think your structures and procedures can come as a response. So you might have to change some things as a school, and that could be a structural change, a policy change, something like that. But that's secondary, and that can support your school culture. Your school culture is your relationships, or are your relationships day in, day out.
So you had a chance there to build a new culture. What about those people that are in toxic cultures? How do you go about changing that? Because that's something that's established. There'll be institutional norms that you've got to try and readdress. What's a real just easy starting point there, Mike?
So it's never easy. And you know, if the leader at the top or the senior leadership team aren't on board, or if they're happy with the status quo, it's exceptionally hard to change the whole school culture, because it really has to start at the top and it has to be intentional from the top. But if you find yourself as an educator in the school, let's say it's a toxic culture, and let's just say, for example, you know, your management team and leadership team and most of the school, they're actually just happy with how it is. I would doubt that, but let's say that. You can still have an influence on your sphere of influence. So I would say, if you had to look at your grade level teaching team, your specialist teaching team, you can have a positive influence on them, which can spread. And so as a minor community within a larger community, you can still have an influence. You're not in a position which lacks power. So I would say exactly the things I mentioned in the book and that we said earlier. Start to take an interest in other people, start to build connections. It's simple things like morning greetings, you know, asking people how they're doing, getting to know people outside of school. Those small little steps, buying someone a coffee here or there, and just being vulnerable and honest with someone with where you're at, they can just unlock the key to a connection with a small group. And who knows, that could spread, you know, even wider. But you can absolutely make an influence. It's exceptionally hard to change it for the whole school, and I would question if you could, but you can definitely make your life a lot easier with a team that you work with every single day. And I would also challenge the leadership team. You know, often their hands are tied by investors or owners or corporations above them, but to really challenge them and say, okay, well, where is our school culture? You know, what do you believe, or where do you believe our school culture is at currently? And what can we do? Because I doubt there's any educator or leader in a school who doesn't want his or her school to succeed, right? We all do. But sometimes people just don't have an awareness that the culture component is absolutely vital and critical to that.
You mentioned earlier about how, you know, this isn't a one-size-fits-all sort of approach, you know, and sometimes this doesn't work. You know, I'm looking down the list of the things you mentioned there around taking interest in other people's business and in other people's lives. You've talked about building connections, knowing them outside school in a school sort of environment, of course, being honest, being vulnerable. How far do you go when those things really maybe they're not getting you anywhere? They're not getting you to where you want to go. How do you start to understand where that line is between treading on people's toes and annoying them? And you know, and genuinely just trying to care and make a connection.
So I think we have to admit it's impossible to have a deep sense of rapport or emotional connection with everyone. That'll never happen, right? But we can have, depending on the degree of it, we can have a connection with every human being, but it won't be at the same level. Depending on those commonalities that you can identify, you will more than likely have a deeper connection with people who come from your home country as an international educator than you will with other people, because there's already a deep-seated emotional connection there that you're really just capitalizing on and building upon. So I think, it's important to never stop, because that also speaks to consistency. So I haven't got a deep connection with all of our faculty members. I would argue maybe I've got with most, but not with all. But I'm still not going to stop trying, and just because that's part of who I am, and I think that's part of what we should be doing. So I'm not going to go out of my way to do anything extravagant, but I don't do that for anyone. It's just small little drop-ins. Hey, how are you doing today? Is there anything I can help with? Small little things we can do to build that connection, and it's going to look different for everyone. When we were building our school culture, one thing we realized, we had these great teachers, but we didn't know anything about each other. So I don't know where you came from. I don't know your background. If you got any brothers or sisters, I don't know anything about you. So how can we force or expect people to be able to collaborate on curriculum matters and on assessment matters when they don't even really know each other? So that was the foundation of how we started when we just created that space for people to connect with each other, was just to get to know each other and really learn a little bit about each other, because then the connection moving forward into work matters is going to be so much more authentic. So yeah, look, you can't beat yourself up as well. If you put effort in and someone just doesn't, respond in the manner that you want them to respond, or it's just becoming pretty mechanical and it's not really working, hey, that's life. And I think it happens. But I would argue that you don't stop. That's who you are, and you just keep being intentional. Because often the way that someone would respond is an indication of where they are at. It's not an indication of where you're at. So if they're responding in a manner which is, closed, shut down, not opening up, it might be because they're dealing with something, or there's some other challenges in their life. And maybe even by you reaching out to them regularly to build a connection, it is having an impact on them. But from your perspective, oh man, they're not responding the way everyone else is responding. So I'm not winning here. So I would keep going. One other very important strategy, just thinking about it now when you're talking, and I say it in the book, is understanding people's names and using people's names to address them, because that automatically puts value on the person. And I find in life, we often go through life with the excuse of, I'm not very good at names, right? But I believe we have the ability to remember, a lot of people's names, but we keep sort of telling ourselves, oh, we're not good at names, not good at names. I won't call the person by their name. And there's nothing more powerful, I believe, than when you meet someone, you remember their name, and then maybe a couple of weeks later, you see them again and you address them by their first name. And I've seen that personally, when I've, met someone, a parent at our school, whatever it is, and sometimes even it's been months, before or in between when I met them last, and to use their first name, it's like deer in the headlights, you remembered me. Yeah, because there's value. I've placed value on you. And I think it's a skill to remember people's names. It's something I'm getting better at. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's so, so important. And I'll tell you the story in my book that really drove home the importance of this. I was volunteering at a prison in Cape Town. I was offering or running football academies there. And I had kind of by chance met someone who was, working in the prison. And I want you to just imagine an African prison, right? Pollsmoor prison in Cape Town, gangsterism through the roof, disease, violence, just a terrible environment in which to be in. And so I was working in the juvenile section, of which there were, I think that the cell originally was designed, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was 400%, over capacity. It reeked of drugs, and it was just completely dominated by the gangs. And so I would go in there once a week, and I would run football academies or rugby camps and just try and offer these kids something different, right? That they haven't perhaps experienced. I was very aware that I was the white guy, from the suburbs coming into a prison, which was largely, African black guys from the township. So there was zero connection at the start, and they were looking at me, who's this guy coming in here trying to, teach us what's going on. So I knew I had to build a connection. Now you can imagine as well that they've got African names, so Xhosa names or Zulu names, and there's 80 to 100 guys in a cell. And anyway, so I would just, I wouldn't call their name. I was like, hey, come over here, or hey, whatever, come over here. And then it was actually the one of the counselors, an employee of the prison. She said to me, because she saw me struggling with the guys' names and then almost just giving up when I would refer to them. And she said to me, she looked me dead in my eyes and said, Mike, their name is all they have in here, because other than their name, they're just a number and a statistic, And man, that hit me like an absolute ton of bricks. And it's so, so true that when you call someone by their name, even in a simple morning greeting, it places value upon them. It shows I've taken the time to learn your name, pronounce your name, and say it. And it makes such a difference. So it's a skill, something to learn on, and something to be intentional about, because that alone will more than you would think would create such a connection.
Yeah, love that, Mike. We're gonna wind it down. We've got a few fun questions just to finish off, like we normally do. we've got 3 world leaders, could be dead or alive, Mike. Which ones would you like to take on a dinner date with you and have a good chat?
Wow, 3. Okay. World, and it can be world leaders, right?
Yeah, anybody you want, really. But
okay, any leader. I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger, Nelson Mandela, and who else? Go on, Sir Alex Ferguson.
oh, what do you think? How do you think that conversation will go between those 3? It'd be quite interesting.
Yeah.
The first time Arnie's made it onto anybody's list, Alan, isn't it?
Really?
Nelson Mandela quite often, to be fair.
Yeah.
Fergie's up there. He's every 3 or 4 episodes there's a Fergie
Really?
thrown out. But Arnold, tell us a story with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Are you just a big Terminator fan, or do you follow politics in California? What's the crack?
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed bodybuilding when I was growing up, believe it or not. And, I just think, if you think about Arnold, if you've read his story, right, he came from the absolute forest in Austria, all right? And for someone there in those times to be able to make it to be governor of a state in the United States, significantly influential, successful in both politics as well as entertainment, from where he came from, I just think it's an incredible story. How he had a dream, he chased it, but also how that dream evolved. So initially he wanted to be the Mr. Olympia, the traditional California bodybuilder, right? And he came over, but then that evolved, and then he sort of got into entertainment and into politics. I mean, I think he's a pretty funny character anyway, but I'm just amazed at the story. You think about Mandela as well, it's an incredible story, where he came from, what he went through, and then what he achieved. And I suppose you could argue with Fergie as well, what he ultimately achieved. So yeah, I like that. I like seeing people who, often up against it, but yet committed to a dream, committed to something they want to work towards, and then chasing it with everything.
Yeah, his commitment was something else, Arnold. I read his book, Total Recall, his autobiography, right? And
yeah.
One of the bits that stood out for me when he came over from Austria and they went through the bodybuilding stuff, and obviously that in itself was quite an incredible achievement and so much dedication. But then the language lessons he took for his acting, right, and how he used to spend so long on the pronunciations of things, I was like, whoa, like you really got that message that he went that extra mile, and he just didn't want to sit still. He always wanted a better life, and he talks a lot, didn't he, about looking after his mum.
Yeah, that's right.
In the book as well. Yeah, really cool. What are you reading at the minute, Mike? Segues us nicely into that question.
Yeah, well, I kind of read quite a few books at the moment. One book I'm reading at the moment is called Startup Nation. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's an interesting book. It was recommended to me, and it really speaks about Israel. And if you look at the startup companies that are coming out of Israel, which is significantly higher as a proportion compared to other countries around the world. Now, one of the reasons that got me interested in that is because in the book, they compare Singapore to Israel, countries of a similar size, similar age, but obviously vastly different challenges, especially now in the world. It's just quite interesting to see how, and when you look at especially technology companies, how they would all have some connection to Israel. And I don't know, a lot of what they speak about is maybe through their military service, how it comes through. Anyway, look, it's a controversial topic at the moment because I know things in the Middle East are quite horrific. But yeah, it's an interesting book though, just to look at that and learn, and to get an insight into the culture of what causes people to be entrepreneurial, and really to be wanting to grow, wanting to learn and develop something. So interesting book.
As a last one from us, Mike, if you had a billboard and you were allowed to write one thing on the billboard, what would your billboard say?
Wow. Give Mike $1 million.
Has the book not sold that many then, Mike?
Oh man, I don't know. Good question. You stumped me on that one.
It's a funny one.
We've got a few sort of little comments and quotes throughout this episode, haven't we, about being intentional?
Look, I think, that's what it comes down to. If you have to simplify human connections and rapport and just, being successful in life, to be quite honest, it's about establishing connections. It's about building with people, and you can't do that by default. It's an intentional action that you have to work towards. So I have no doubt, no matter what sector of society you work in, even in your personal life, if you have developed the ability and the skills to connect with people authentically, you will be successful. And hands down, I really believe that. So you can put that on the board.
Tell our viewers and listeners where they can find your book.
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon, actually most good online bookstores. It's available all over the world, actually. Can be purchased and delivered. I've got some ebooks as well. I've got a website, thepowerofrapport.com. You can go there together with my blog and learn a little bit more about me and the book. I would love to hear feedback. If you've read the book or if you just got some thoughts, please do get in touch. It'll be really awesome. LinkedIn, I use quite a lot. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, that'll be great. I'd love to have a conversation with anyone out there who just wants to learn more. Like I said a few times, I'm by no means an expert, but this is definitely an area that I'm passionate about and I'm continually learning about. So it's been great to chat. I've really appreciated it. So thank you, guys.
It's been great to have you on, Mike. And if you listen carefully to Mike there, he said it's at all good bookshops. And if the bookshop hasn't got it, then you know what category to file a bookshop in. Have a word and build some rapport. Mike, thanks a lot for your time. Really, really enjoyed listening to you and your thoughts about building rapport, and looking forward to experimenting and trying a few of those myself.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Ellen.